Ready?
Yeah.
Still awake after having those cookies? All right, well, today we're going to talk about having Drupal and Angular in the same space and how that all works together and works out. I'm Ryan Fromm. I live in Ames. I'm a web application developer at Iowa State University. I'm under John Van Dyke and Michael Hofmankel, and I've been a contributor to Luggage, which is Michael Hofmankel's brainchild. You may have heard about it. It's an educational platform that leverages Drupal. The reason I'm interested in Angular JS and Drupal is because I started with Drupal 1 way back in the summer of 2013, so not too long ago. But I started just building Drupal sites with John and was using jQuery and just kind of doing event-based things. And recently I've had the opportunity to start building an Angular application. Kind of started from scratch, wanted some structure, and so yeah. Today's outline, I'll talk about why Drupal and Angular together is interesting, and yeah, why you want to do that. The idea, we'll talk about the idea of headless Drupal. There's kind of a small following starting to emerge using Drupal as a backend and less as a CMS, your traditional like UI CMS. Start getting into like how to set up an Angular app with Drupal as a backend. Where does that app live? And then we'll go through how many steps does it take to get a Drupal Angular app set up. So not necessarily code, but there'll be code in the slides. So why would you want to do Drupal 8 specifically in Angular JS? For me, as an application developer, traditionally, like building a JavaScript app without some sort of structure, I'm sure any JavaScript developer will tell you, like, developing a jQuery only app is a nightmare for many reasons. The biggest is that it's really hard to test and maintain and have somebody else work alongside you. And the last project I did was a jQuery project, and it got really messy. And for this last project that I've started, I really wanted to leverage some sort of JavaScript platform / framework that would give me more structure. And Angular JS has a lot of power to it and pre-built tools to use and leverage, and the same goes with Drupal 8. It's nice to have a data modeling interface like Drupal 8. Drupal 8 is great for modeling data, and yeah, so you also might consider the two because they're so similar. That was one of the biggest things I found was that Angular JS and Drupal, they template basically the same. I mean, Twig and how you template with Angular JS are pretty close to the same thing. There's some other similarities that we'll talk about. And finally, there's some structure for JavaScript. You don't have a huge JS script with 2,000 lines of events for every little edge case that you could think of. And Drupal 8 is, I see, an emerging, really awesome back end, like Google App Engine or Amazon Web Service, their back-end solution. So some of the pre-built tools that are really useful specifically for AngularJS apps with Drupal 8 is the data modeling. Drupal Drupal 8 is an excellent data modeling interface, and you can model data extremely quick using, and you have user authentication that is already pre-built. You don't have to develop some, your own implementation. It's people have spent years developing this authentication. It's great for resource management. There's discrete objects, which makes unit testing easier. For me, as I've traditionally been an object-oriented programmer, I come from C and C++, and so Drupal 8 for me feels kind of home. It's all warm and fuzzy, and I started with it several months ago, and it feels natural. It's fun to me. I like having instances of objects.
What do you mean by discrete objects?
So like you have an object and you refer to that object in multiple different places. It's a single object. You're not just calling like some function somewhere that's public.
Okay.
And the same way with AngularJS, you have testable objects. You have controllers, services. They're testable. You don't have, like I said before, a long list of, click events or hover events, which is great for unit testing. You also have templating, which means that you can see all of what's going to be displayed on the screen before you dive into the app. You can just look at the file system and know, what's going to be used where, and it's more maintainable in my opinion. Back to the similarities, the templating for AngularJS and routing and Drupal 8 are very similar. I found that right away. That was the biggest similarity was the templating, and how going from Twig to the way Angular does it is like pretty close to the same thing. The AngularJS has the idea of routing on the client side, the same with Drupal 8. They're implemented a little bit differently, but same idea. They both have controllers and services. AngularJS is really service-based, and which is particularly useful when you have you might use Drupal 8 as a backend. This idea of just getting yourself in the mindset of using services everywhere as much as you can. And I mentioned again structure for JS. It's great. Although AngularJS calls itself a model view whatever, I just refer to it as a model view controller. And I think it's a big win. And this is kind of the idea I'm talking about, a multi-platform setup, and just using Drupal like you would Google App Engine or whatever. I think the advantage with Drupal 8 is that you get a data modeling interface with it. You get all these modules and add-ins and tools that you don't necessarily get with Google App Engine. And for Drupal developers that are looking to do an application that know Drupal, I was in that very same position, and I looked at Google App Engine, and I was like, man, I could really just use Drupal 8 this way and not have to learn a new platform, not have to learn like Google App Engine, Python, So this is where I see like Drupal 8 is going to be great for just applications. And this is how you would kind of go and start your multi-platform. You basically just use Drupal as endpoints. You create endpoints in Drupal and then call them on via even an iOS app or an Android app. Name. I'm referring to AngularJS, but once you make Drupal just the backend, you can really develop native apps to your heart's content for whatever platform you want. There's this idea of headless Drupal that's beginning to emerge with Drupal 8, and it's just using Drupal as a backend, as an alternative, like I mentioned, to Google App Engine. You can create custom APIs and really develop your own user interface on the front end, and you can abstract out Drupal's interface and make it whatever. So here's what a API might look like in Drupal 8 via routing. You can see that there's 2 files that you need, and there should say module controller. Basically, you create a module, and then within that module, you define your module.routing.yml, and you create a route. You define your path. So I have cookies of kind, and this path is what an app might call. So when I do a GET request, I call this route, and the controller says it sends it to this controller, get cookies of kind, and there you go. We return cookies of that kind. It's as easy as that, really. Insert drush cc all after you do these 2 files, or you might be scratching your head for a while, like I do. It's really that easy, and you have an API, and you just keep adding and adding. So it's really quite simple in Drupal 8, I found. It's fast. So where does the app live? Or where can it live? This is a big question when I first started. There's not much documentation. So your first choice is outside of Drupal. This can be, obviously wherever you want. The app can be on a separate server somewhere. There's pros and cons to that. You can put your app on a server with Node.js and have Drupal running on whatever else you want to. It's easy to set up. Cons might be that you can't use Drupal modules within your app. You can't use the templating from Drupal. You can't leverage a page template to display your app. You can add your app directory just within the root of Drupal. This is what I did with the current project. It was the fastest way to get it up and running. Basically, just made one Git repo with the site and the app within the site. Maybe not necessarily the best, but it was the fastest way to get me what I needed. It's really easy to set up. It's easy to maintain. One of the cons is that Drupal doesn't really recognize that there's a directory called app. It chooses to ignore it. And so this quirkiness is like trying to make a menu item that goes to this path. The Drupal validation doesn't pass. It says that the directory doesn't exist. So it chooses to ignore that there's a directory there. Or you can make a Drupal module. This way is a little bit more complicated because you basically have to make your own template, and there's not much documentation for it right now. So this way is probably going to take you the longest just to set up. The reason that you might want to go this way is because Drupal recognizes it as a module, and it can use other modules, like the tour module, or whatever else, your own custom modules that you can add in to your app. And you can leverage Drupal templates. So how many steps does it take to get a functional app? AngularJS and Drupal. Does anybody have a guess?
4.
It's close, actually. So let's see. Step 1, to get just a bare minimum functional app that you get a return on, install Drupal 8. And this is just like Drupal 7. If you have, the caveat is that if you have Drush set up for Drupal 7, it's probably not going to work for Drupal 8. So you have to do some magic and call Drush 7 something else, so that's differentiated from the Drush you use to use Drush on Drupal 7. So you get your Drupal 8 installed. Next thing you need to do is enable your web services modules, which are HAL, your HTTP basic authentication, RESTful web services, and serialization. And those come in core. And then the bonus module that you might need, I chose to use it because it gives you a UI, is REST UI, and basically just gives you a UI for your REST settings file where you can choose to expose resources like node resources or views or user. It's a separate module. I recommend getting the dev version because as of Alpha 12, the regular version, the full release version crashes Drupal. It's pretty gnarly. I've had it happen 3 times. So now we have a Drupal installation. We have the web services module is enabled. We're getting close. We're on step 3. So, and this code that's not a real thing. I just made that up. Just so you know. Don't try that. It won't work. But so if you have installed the REST UI module, you'll see something like this. It'll actually have the next bunch like this will be posts, and then you can enable whatever. But this is for like a node. You can say it can accept a JSON format, and it uses basic authentication. If you don't have the REST UI module enabled, it's a little bit more complicated, and you have to dive into YAML. So you need to find the REST services YAML and the REST core module and hack it up. So this is what the REST services YAML looks like in that module, and this is it's the same thing that the REST UI shows, except for just in the YAML, so you don't get a cool UI with checkboxes and stuff. And so as you can see, by default, Drupal 8 enables get, post, patch, delete. I think there's a put in there too for nodes, so it's already enabled. Step 4 is to set your permissions, and so I'm going to say that probably, most of the time you're going to want to not give permissions to view your content to an anonymous user. Just from the use cases that I've kind of run through. So what that means is that you'll have to pass a username and password if you don't select this checkbox and this checkbox. The top one is for your node permissions. The bottom one is for the web services permissions when you do the request. Step 5 is to check yourself. And you can see that now we can do a request to wherever your installation is, node 1. You have to make a node 1 first. So create a content type and then content. And then send it a accept header. And for the longest time, and I believe the documentation, a lot of people have talked about putting content type there for this accept header. At least a lot of the searches and examples online I've seen content type, and that doesn't work. And so I finally found out that you have to use accept. Otherwise you get an HTML return, and it's formatted, and you get all the CSS, and it's beautiful, except for it's easier just to get JSON and not have to parse the DOM. Then you send your user, Drupal dude, that's your username, and then your password. That's my password. Go ahead and try it. And this is your result. And if you get a 200 OK, you're winning. So now we have this back end that we can get nodes, and depending on what else you enable, you can create a view, and you can see your view. You can get a user's information via enabling users. You can get specific fields. You can do a lot of things. You can get menus. So you have all these different resources for your AngularJS app. And at this point, like, you're pretty much home free. You know how to do most things. You know how to develop a custom API via routing. You know how to expose resources. All that's left is developing your app and modeling your data. And so step 6 is to set up Angular, and you can see if you have like a custom API, like we did earlier, you'll see that I just call wherever your site's located, you know, get cookies of kind, and then this is the parameter. This can be a variable. You can see. Right here, it's a little bit different because I use different paths, but like this could be get cookies of kind, and then here's these curly braces tell you that there's a variable that's passed in, and that is automatically passed to here. So you pass it chocolate, and hopefully, if it's a success, you get a chocolate result, and you can go and do with that what you may in your Angular app. If you have a view, you can do a view of views and not do a custom API call. In here, you would maybe query the DB and get all of your cookies of kind to get that information. You can do a view of views. You can make a view that filters by kinds. So then you would just call whatever that view is. Yeah, so I would say 6 steps would get you on your way, at least it did for me. You'll find that documentation for doing these sorts of things using Drupal as kind of an endpoint for applications is slim right now. I've seen that lately the documentation has been expanding for the RESTful part of Drupal 8, but it's difficult because it's been changing so much lately. You'll find tutorials from December are outdated. Things have changed since then. And that was really the difficulty for me. The biggest barrier has been the documentation. And so, yeah, I wanted to spend today just to talk about what I've been finding in the last several months as I've been developing this app. And yeah, so and that's really all I have. I'd like to leave the rest of this time for discussion if anybody wants to talk about what I'm doing or what you're doing. My focus right now is just an application, really just an application, more than developing like my own custom CMS on the front end. I know people are doing that and maybe doing a separate mobile site via AngularJS. But yeah, sir.
You said stuff was changing a lot. Do you mean Angular itself is changing, or just the whole concept, the whole headless Drupal with some other client-side front end, like that whole bit? What part was changing?
Drupal 8 is changing a lot.
Angular,
the nice thing about Angular is it's fairly stable at this point, at least from what I've noticed. It hasn't seemed to change that much. One of the things I liked about Angular was that it's backed by Google, and I would say that they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so it's well supported, and that's really nice. But Drupal 8 specifically, when I first started out, it was really scary because, going from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8, now you're messing with objects. I know how to maybe hack this together in Drupal 7, but in Drupal 8, you're going to objects, a new templating system. There's not as many modules for support in Drupal 8, and documentation is pretty slim. Nobody's really focusing on it right now. And like I said, documentation was really the biggest barrier. You'll find several tutorials online, but they'll also probably be outdated at this point from 2013, just last year.
Yeah.
And so that was really difficult.
Yeah. I'm not super familiar with Angular itself, but you were talking about where the app lives and an app directory and whether to put it inside Drupal or put it outside Drupal. Is that an Angular specific thing, the app directory, or is that?
So
I'm not a Drupal guy either, so maybe I'm wasting
everything. No. So I look at it as there's Drupal and then there's your app. By app, I mean it's not a website. It's some sort of application that its purpose is not to just display information and content. It does something interactive.
Okay.
So for me, it's its own separate entity other than Drupal, and I want to leverage Drupal and use all the great things about Drupal, the user authentication, the content management, the data modeling, and use that in my app. And hopefully, maybe in the future, now that I have two distinct entities, I can, in theory, just keep adding other entities, like an iOS app, if you want to make a native app for iPhone.
Sure.
It'll act just like your AngularJS app, but in that way, it's very scalable, and so.
Okay.
AngularJS, it doesn't really. It's not nearly as picky as Drupal in your naming schemas.
Mm-hmm.
You can define your own schemes and paths, and so.
Yeah. You kind of hit on this, but why Angular over any of the other client-side JavaScript stuff, like Back or Ember, or one of the other billion of them cropping up?
So the biggest one for me was that AngularJS is well supported. Google's behind it, and so I know that it's going to be around for a while and supported for a while. Second was that when I delved into Angular, it made sense.
Sure.
It's very object-oriented, and that felt like home for me, and I really enjoy that. I think it's really fun to mess with objects. I know a lot of people disagree with that, obviously, but I guess I'm different in that way. AngularJS also has this idea of services and kind of like abstracting everything into a service, if you can. I really like that about it. Backbone, it was kind of just meh for me. I don't know, I can't say that I have a good defense for not choosing Backbone, but you can just make things so fast with AngularJS, I found. And combine that with like Bootstrap. I use Twitter Bootstrap. You're not messing with the CSS, and you can see, whereas like in jQuery you kind of just conjure HTML wherever. You have to look through a script to see what's being conjured on the screen, which really sucks when you're trying to comprehend these 4,000 lines of JavaScript code.
Your app logic and your markup is all mashed up into one.
Yes. It's all separated in Angular, and that's the idea of a model view controller. And so for me it just made a lot of sense. And you can do things extremely fast.
What have you found in Drupal 8 that maybe like either limitations or things that aren't working quite right as far as the REST API is working? I noticed you had like under your views, you had like a view ID in the URL. Because we do services before to build things, and it gets, you run into the limitations or icky bits using that pretty quick. And if we're going to do an API for like a remote application, the last thing I want to do is have whoever's on the other end of this thing, which is not a Drupal developer, have to understand any Drupalism. So a nice clean API, but I also want it to make sense for the people that are doing the content management of the Drupal site. So when they're looking at the Angular API, they can map that back to the things that they're maintaining within the Drupal system.
Yeah,
Does Drupal 8 go a long ways to fix that, or are there still some kind of dark corners we gotta watch out for?
So the reason I use the view example is because you can do that. Like, you can query some content using a view really fast. Like, that's what views is really. You can add a filter and stuff. You can certainly do, like, you can abstract it to, name your path that makes sense to everybody, and really on the back create this route to this custom function that still uses views query. And
so in a view in Drupal 8, then, can you give it the URL for the API right there in the view?
like to change it from view ID to something. You can name it like, so one example I have is like I created an inventory system and I named it items, a list of items, and so you can do that. Yeah. Yep.
The slide you had with the REST client on it, where you're making the request, is that built into Drupal 8, or was that just a separate REST client?
That was dev HTTP client, I think is what it's called. So it's a Google extension. There's a ton of them. Mozilla has them.
And then for the authentication, does Angular just send the credentials along with those requests to the API endpoint?
Yeah, you add, it's a header, so you add headers before you send the request in AngularJS. So.
Kind of along that is what other kind of authentication mechanisms other than basic auth can you use right now?
So right now there's basic authentication and then cookies, and so basically no authentication.
I heard that there was something afoot to do more, actual encryption you couldn't see and clear? Maybe their certificates or anything like that. Have you seen any movement along that line?
So there's this module, it's a contributed module called OAuth, and I'm not entirely sure what it is. So,
Well,
I mean, does anybody...
if your concern is you should, it doesn't matter how you do authentication, you need to be doing your transport over SSL. And then basic auth is as good as anything else. Right? You're trusting your client because the client is allowed to make requests, and so your client knows it's authenticated.
Unless it's a JavaScript app, somebody can...
But that's what this is. Right?
Yeah, right.
And that's the point is you are trusting your client.
Right.
You have to make peace with that on some level.
Yeah.
Or not.
And if not, then you shouldn't do this.
Yeah.
Do you have a question?
I just want to say there's been a recent change in Drupal 8 core where HTTP access, I believe, was tweaked, so it's dropping a folder into Drupal 8 on that app folder. Now I think it's going to have to be whitelisted. Up till now, you've been able to just drop HTML folders in there. It's no problem. But they're locking it down. That's like the last week.
I think, like, pretty much you're probably going to have a Drupal install somewhere and then an app install somewhere else. Is pretty much how a real world use case would be. Just because you are treating them as two separate entities rather than like if you just create this module with this app in it. What is it really? Is it a Drupal site or, so. Plus your application might want to do other things other than just call Drupal all day long. So you might need those extra resources. You might have a whole bunch of users hitting the Drupal install and like your AngularJS app at the same time, and it'd be nice to separate those. So. Anything else?
Would you ever do it again?
Well, I mean, like you just saw, it was 6 steps. And well, aside from step 6 really being like, here's the bulk of it. But, like as far as, so like I dove into trying to make Google App Engine work, and I found, like, for me personally, because I have knowledge of Drupal and how you create a content type, and then you create content, and how you model things in Drupal, like going to App Engine just is kind of dumb. Because I already knew Drupal and I could do it 10 times faster. And so like the actual getting a functional app took me like 4 hours. Doing this, getting a list of returns took me no time at all, just because you use Drupal 8, you create a route, and you call stuff from your AngularJS app, and that AngularJS app uses Bootstrap, so you don't have to do all this, theming of it. You create an HTML template for your AngularJS app, and you're good to go. And it's really, really fast, and I've really enjoyed using Drupal 8, and that's the reason I'm here now, is because I think that Drupal 8 has a bright future ahead, although I don't know that this is like a major focus of Drupal 8. I don't know, it just kind of fell into place like this, but I foresee that Drupal 8 could be a big contender with App Engine if there's any focus, just because there's a huge Drupal community, and you can create things really fast.
One thing I thought was kind of interesting was, we're not on Drupal yet, and there seems to be a lot of, looking at the way the underlying, how much core is changing and how much templating is changing, things like that. The change from 7 to 8 seems pretty big, and the fact that you were able to get this up in 8, like, obviously the modules you needed, there aren't as many, but the modules you needed are there.
Yeah,
Right.
well, I needed core,
Yeah.
and I needed one extra, I really didn't need the extra module, the contrib module, rest UI, but I used it because it was there.
Yeah.
I really just used Drupal 8. That's all I really did. So, and like I said, for me, because I have object-oriented experience, it wasn't as much of a leap.
Mhm.
So, it may have been quicker for me. But, yeah, it's extremely fast.
Cool.
So, I am not dreading Drupal 8 as much as everybody else, it sounds like.
Yeah, I'm not sure I will say, kind of your comment, is this something we didn't do again? We've been doing this since Drupal 6 with Flash apps on the front end.
Oh, really?
Because, and we did an internal app on Drupal 7 with the backbone. And we see Drupal 8 is meeting, there's a desire, at least right now, and who knows if it'll all pan out or not, about being able to share content across platforms and across properties.
Mhm.
Right, whether you're going to have a widget that runs on Facebook and this other thing that runs on this other community platform, your websites, your mobile apps, and Flash, whatever. And then having there isn't a good solution for that really in the market that is like the go-to thing to use for exactly what we just saw.
Mhm.
And so I see Drupal 8 is, it could end up being a very simple, easy de facto solution for somebody that wants just centralized content that is syndicated across a bunch of different platforms, whether they're JavaScript apps or anything else.
Right.
Because it's so easy to do, and it's all baked right at the core. And it's easy to do in Drupal 7 with the services module, the icky bits, right? If you clean up the icky bits, then it's the easiest thing in the world to install these. And then, like you said, the content management aspect of it makes it easy to build rich content models that are really easy to maintain, that make sense for content managers. And then if you can get the API to make really good sense to your application developers, I mean, you can't lose.
Mhm.
I mean, it would be
So
simple
from
to
the-
build these things out.
From the content editing standpoint, then they're still using the Drupal side of things. You're not
Yeah.
building like a custom Angular front end
You
with busy
could.
and stuff.
You could. There's who is it? Who's the guy that does organic groups? Can't remember his name is.
Someone mentioned that too.
He's been posting a couple of times over the last couple of weeks about using Angular to replace Drupal like front end, so in content management to forms and everything in an Angular app.
Yeah, yeah.
And
See, I think that's
just
the
using Drupal really as a data repository.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work that would need to go into something like that. Where we see it is you really have that course application, you have the content management thing where you just maintain your content, and then you have all of the applications.
Sure. Sure.
That right now is dead simple to do, even in Drupal 7. Just got to get over a few crufty bits that hopefully Drupal 8 fix.
Yeah, like I said, Drupal 8, I mean, 30 minutes it takes before you're writing a custom function that you can call from wherever.
Yeah, people have asked me
30
when
minutes.
we would use Drupal 8, and I said, well, as soon as it comes out, as long as we have like an Angular app that we need to use. Because like you don't need any additional, you don't have to wait on any contrib modules. And all of the views and all of the the content management bits. Is it any reference in core?
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Yeah. So with that and views really is all you need to build rich content models that you can expose as an API and be done. And do that today to Drupal 8 release or even before.
Yeah, it's a serious contender if you're not having to migrate stuff from the Drupal 7, whatever. Starting over from scratch, considering what are you going to do for this upcoming project.
It's cool.
What else? Anybody? Thank you.